if you want to use DAP, just be aware that the yeast can no longer assimilate it once it's gotten to about a 9% ABV. And it takes a while because it takes a while for the yeast to assimilate it. So and I don't know where the cutoff is, but you want to get it in early enough that, in other words, if you're already at 8%, I've read some things that people kind of hesitate and go, I'm not sure if you put it in at that point, if there's enough time now before it goes from 8 to 9%, for your yeast to be able to do anything with it. And if the yeast can't assimilate it, it gets left over as a flavor profile in your mead. And
right.
as you know, you guys, we taste a lot of nutrient bombs in competitions, don't we?
We do, yeah.
And
Jim,
yeah, and that's.
I think it was Joe commented earlier that DAP, he feels least fusels. And my response to that was sometimes, but if you're managing your nutrients properly, I don't think at least I know plenty of people that still use Fermaid K and DAP, and their meads are amazing. I mean,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just saying these are things you need to be considerate of.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's
if you put it in too late and it gets stuck, it'll get left behind as a salty flavor in your mead.
Exactly.
Now, how do I know it's salty? You guys, I taste every single thing I put in my mead. I know what DAP tastes like because I've tasted it.
Yuck.
I know what sorbate tastes like. I know what sulfite tastes like. I know what pectinase. I taste all of that stuff. And I tell you, I think when there's been residual DAP left in a mead that the yeast never got to eat, I can taste it in there. So I'm not saying you will always taste DAP if you use it, but I think that you stand a good chance of tasting it if you don't use it correctly at the right amounts and in the right time frame.
Yes.
Now, incidentally, speaking about amounts, the federal government, I don't know if it's the TTB or who exactly, but there's regulations where if you're a professional, and that doesn't, for most of us probably listen to the show, that doesn't apply. But they tell you that you can only have so many. It's 960 milligrams per liter, if you want to know that, and who knows what that means or even cares. But they're saying you can only have so much DAP in your mead before it's illegal. And so keep in mind also then that Fermaid K also has DAP in it. I don't use DAP because I've tasted it too many times in meads, and I've found that when I make my stuff with just Go Firm and Fermaid O, I've never had a better tasting mead since I've started using that science for the meads that I make. I like the Fermaid O because it's organic, and it takes a while longer for the yeast to be able to metabolize it or assimilate it. I'm not sure which word is truly a most appropriate word in the science world. But they have to go through some more steps before that becomes workable for them inside their little bellies, where the DAP, that's like mainlining into their arm, they just instantly go off and go crazy, and they don't get that same buzz from the Fermaid O. So that has a tendency to makes their breakfast last longer. You guys know how if you eat oatmeal, it's still with you by 10 or 11 o'clock, and if you ate a donut and coffee, it's gone by the time you get to work, right? Kind of the same thing. And if it regulates how it's being assimilated, it also does great job in not having the temperature spikes that we really don't want to have. So if we feed them a little bit each day as they need it, we're maintaining a very smooth fermentation. We're eliminating all those temperature spikes, and most everybody I know of that now uses this process say they're not turning back. There's no turning back. I think we're all open for new things that are going to be better than what we have now. But in my opinion, for me, this is what makes the best meats in my hands. I know some people are concerned, and I've seen Yeah, I've seen too many attempts of people saying, well, if you use GoFirm and then Fermate, they're not getting any of the macro and micronutrients that the scientists tell us yeast need to have. That's why they think, well, you got to use some Fermate K too. But it's not true. If we look at all of what the yeast get during the rehydration process, when you use the GoFirm, all of the things that they would have been getting in the Fermate K, they've already got directly inside their stomach when they were rehydrated by using the GoFirm. And so actually, the GoFirm and the Fermate O were designed by Lalaman to be used in concert with each other to be a complete package. And so that's why we don't really need to try to feel like we have to use the Fermate K along with Fermate O to make up the difference. If you've used the GoFirm and the Fermate O, you're giving them everything they could ever want.
Yeah, my starters are Fermate O, and I don't know, I guess I'm old-fashioned in the way I feed my nutrients.
Well, I think
did I say
I'm curious. The next time I have a chance.
Oh, I meant to say GoFirm.
You meant GoFirm.
I meant GoFirm. Yes, thank you. I suddenly realized I was like, wait, what?
I think the men that I respect the most, I believe that he still feeds them when they show that they're hungry.
Yeah.
You guys probably know who I'm talking about. I believe. I haven't talked to him recently, but I know that unless he's changed, he doesn't even feed on a given schedule. He just waits until things slow down and he can see that the yeast needs some more, and he feeds them more. I believe he also still uses Fermate K and DAP.
Yeah, I do those. I feed at the end of the lag phase and up until the first third. And stir twice a day. And it works for me. It's maybe a little more complicated, but it's what I'm used to.
Yeah, you find something that works for you and you stick with it, right?
Right, yeah.
On the back channel, Bob and I we have a couple of recipes we still make, quote unquote wrong because we developed them before we knew any better, and then when we tried updating them, we weren't happy with the results.
Yeah, my
Acer Glen. Yeah. My Acer Glen. I tried updating that and I didn't like it. Yeah. So I just make it wrong.
My cherry melomel, I make it the same way I made it 20 years ago when I made it the first time, using all the bad ideas because it was amazing the first time. I don't want to screw it up.
No. So that's important to know too, people. I'm not necessarily telling you my way's the best, but what I want to encourage you to do is, if you don't have a way, try mine. And it's the same as Sergio's. It's a lot of people are having wonderful success doing this. And it's so easy. You don't have to measure anything. You do need a hydrometer, and you need to know what your starting gravity was. But once you see that the lag phase is passed, and you now see some active fermentation, you feed it today, tomorrow, and the third day in a row. That's as simple as it can get. Then you wait until you get to the third sugar break or the fourth day, depending on what happens first. And quite frankly, I don't think I've ever not had the sugar break come later than the fourth day. In other words, for me, it's always been just feed them 4 days in a row and you're done. Now, incidentally, the little bit that I have fed and waited until I saw that they started to slow down and needed a little bit more, wasn't much more than a day and a half anyway. And so I think by just using the TOSNA protocol and feeding it 4 days in a row, it's so simple that it's mindless, and it works. Incidentally, when we talked about the different phases that the yeast go through, they move from the lag phase into the growth phase, and that's where they make 90%, maybe not, I don't know if it's 90, but almost all of the flavor profile that you taste, all of the fusols, if they're going to make fusols, which are those off flavors from the higher alcohols that they make when they're stressed out, almost anything that you can taste and smell in a mead is made during the growth phase. And that's when the yeast are multiplying or replicating at a tremendous phase. They're chewing through most of the sugar in that period of time. And that generally only lasts about 4 or 5 days anyway. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's by chance that we learn to figure out we need to give them most of their food in these 4 or 5 day period of their life when they're doing 90% of the work. Once they're done with the growth phase, they move into the stationary phase, and they're not out there, playing football for 4 quarters anymore. They're done now. They'll still need to go back, and for those of you guys that are in construction, you realize that every day you go to work, and if you stopped and cleaned up every little mess you made all day long, you wouldn't hardly be able to work for very long without stopping and cleaning all the time.
You just hit AJ's, you just hit AJ's life.
But at the end of the day, though, you stop and you clean up at the end of the day. And then I have my own construction company, and we have what we call Tidy Fridays, and on Friday afternoon we clean up especially good so things are nice and clean over the weekend, and so we can start again on Monday on a clean note. The yeast will do the same thing. So once they go through the growth phase, they've made all the flavors and all the aromas that you love and hopefully not any longer, the ones that you don't like. Then they move into that stationary phase. And they're actually going back and they're cleaning up the mess that they made in the lab when they were busy making alcohol. And a lot of what is done in the historical aging process where you would lock your meat up and you would let it age, if you will allow your yeast to stay in your must for another month or so, a huge portion of anything that was left behind when they were hot and heavy doing their big job in the growth phase, they go back and clean those things up later if you'll just leave them in there. And so now we're kind of starting to move over into ideas about racking and a space between when the fermentation's actually finished. Maybe we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay. But so here's some things I see on social media that are wrong, and I see this all the time, especially in the winemaking world. So many people will rack their wine off of their. They'll rack when the fermentation's not even finished. They're at 10:30 and they're removing their wine from the biomass, and then they wonder why their wine got stalled. It didn't ferment to completion. Well, you can't remove your yeast from your must and expect that the fermentation is going to go on in a very serious fashion when you've removed 95% of the workers. But the reason that they, in my opinion, rack prematurely is because they're afraid of off flavors. They're afraid that if they leave their wine sitting on top of all those lees and those solids down in the bottom, it's going to make off flavors. And so to avoid that, they rack, in my opinion, way too soon.
I'm not so sure if it's that or if they don't have a hydrometer, and as soon as it starts slowing down, they assume it's done.
Well, so it might be both, but I've oftentimes seen that they've read somewhere that they're supposed to rack at 10:30 or at 10:40. Now, I can say, unless you guys are fortunate enough where you can actually buy wine grapes and press them yourself, and then take the skins and let your must macerate on the skins for a while, I would love to have that opportunity.
Oh, it was wonderful. I got to do that once.
Yeah, I bet. I would love to be able to have that.
Yeah, just the once. What I ended up doing was I really like Chamberson wines. It's one of my favorite wine styles. And I had a really wonderful one at a winery in North Georgia a long time ago. And I've always wanted to do a Chamberson mead. And so I thought, and I found out there's a Chamberson you can pick grower like north of me. He only has like 12 acres of vines, so it's not a ton, but if you get there early, I got there late and all I got was gleanings, so I got enough to do about half the grapes I wanted for the batch I was doing. And he asked me did I want the skins, because he went ahead and squished them right there. He had a press, so he pressed it, and this old guy who's like 30 years older than me whips out a joint and he's like, let's wait till this is done. It was pretty funny. I was like, wait, you're like 80. What the hell? But anyway, so he mashed up the grapes and asked me did I want to keep the skins, and I said yeah, because I figured, I know skins in wine, even though I don't
You
make
want to
wine
put
a
the
lot.
tatted.
Yeah, they add a lot.
Yeah.
They add a lot to